The night everything fell apart started with a jar of pasta sauce. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know that's not the kind of opening line that makes someone lean forward and say, "Tell me more." But that's the truth. I was standing in the kitchen at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, reaching up to the top shelf because my husband had reorganized the cabinets again without telling me, and the jar slipped. I grabbed for it. My foot caught the edge of the rug, the same rug I had asked him 3 times to tape down, and I went down hard. Left wrist first, then hip, then the side of my head against the cabinet door on the way to the floor. I lay there for a moment just listening to the sound of my own breathing. The house was dark, except for the light above the stove. Outside, the neighborhood was completely still. No cars, no wind, nothing. Just that particular silence that only exists at midnight in a suburb where everyone has a lawn and a garage and a life that looks fine from the outside. My wrist was on fire. I could already feel it swelling. My husband was upstairs. I knew exactly where he was in bed. Phone face down on the nightstand, the way he always kept it, fan running on high, because he said he couldn't sleep without white noise. We had been married for 3 years at that point. I knew his habits the way you know the layout of a room you've been locked in. I called his name once, then louder, nothing. I tried to push myself up and the pain in my wrist shot straight to my shoulder and I had to stop. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and I reached for my phone, which had slid a few feet away when I fell, and I called him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text that said, "I fell in the kitchen. I think I hurt my wrist. Can you come down?" I watched the screen. The little check marks appeared. He had read it. He didn't come down. I want you to understand something about that moment, because it's easy to hear a story like this and think, why didn't she just call 911? And the honest answer is that I sat on that floor and thought, he's going to come. Any second, now I'm going to hear the stairs creak and he's going to come around the corner and say something dismissive like you really need to be more careful, and I'm going to feel embarrassed for making a big deal of it. That was the version of events my brain had been trained to expect. Not emergency services, not real help. Just the bare minimum, offered with a sigh. He didn't come. After 20 minutes, I called my sister. She lived 40 minutes away and she drove over in her pajamas and took me to urgent care where they x-rayed my wrist and told me it was a hairline fracture. They gave me a brace and told me to follow up with an orthopedic specialist. When I got home at 2 in the morning, my husband was asleep. He mentioned it at breakfast the next day, said he'd been exhausted, said he'd figured I was fine since I hadn't called 911, said I should have been more careful reaching for things on high shelves. Then he poured his coffee and asked if I'd remembered to pay the electric bill. I said yes. I had remembered. I always remembered. My name is Claire, and I want to tell you about the 3 years before that night and the 6 months after it, because the before is important. You can't understand the after without understanding how small I had become. I met my husband Daniel when I was 26. I was working as a graphic designer at a mid-size marketing firm downtown. He was a project manager at a tech company across the street. We met at a coffee shop that was equidistant between our 2 offices, the kind of meet-cute that you tell at dinner parties later. He was funny and confident, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. I was charmed immediately. We dated for a year. He was attentive in the beginning, remembered small things I mentioned, showed up with coffee the way I liked it, texted back within minutes. My friends liked him. My mom liked him. My sister thought he was a little intense, but she said that about most people I dated. We moved in together after 8 months. That was when things started to shift, but so slowly, so gradually, that I didn't have a name for what was happening for a very long time. It started with my friends. He never said, "Stop seeing your friends." That's not how it works, and I think that's why it took me so long to see it clearly. What he said was things like, "I just feel like we don't spend enough time together. Don't you want to be home with me?" Or, "Every time you go out with them you come back in a weird mood. I'm just saying what I observe." Or, "I don't know, Lexi always seemed kind of negative to me." I worry she brings you down. Lexi had been my best friend since sophomore year of college. Within a year of moving in with Daniel, I had cancelled on Lexi so many times that she stopped inviting me to things. I told myself I'd reach out and explain, but the explaining felt complicated and I was tired, and Daniel always needed something when I sat down to write the message, and eventually, the silence between us just became the new normal. I stopped going to the weekly dinners my work friends organized on Thursdays. Daniel pointed out that I always came home from those smelling like wine and in a talkative mood, and he had early mornings, and didn't I think it was a little inconsiderate? I started thinking it was a little inconsiderate. My mom lived 2 hours away, and I saw her at holidays. My sister Maya came to visit twice a year, and every time she came, Daniel had somewhere he needed to be, and the apartment felt different with him, gone bigger, somehow. I noticed that I laughed more. I noticed that I talked faster. I noticed that I kept glancing at the door. I quit my job at 28. That one was my idea, or at least I thought it was at the time. Daniel made a good salary. We talked about starting a family eventually. He said it made financial sense for me to freelance from home rather than commute. He said we'd save on transportation, on work clothes, on the lunches I was buying downtown every day. He made a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet made sense. What the spreadsheet didn't show was that working from home meant I was there when he called during lunch breaks. It meant I was available when his schedule changed. It meant that the colleagues I used to talk to every day became faces on a screen. I saw less and less. Until I stopped scheduling the calls altogether because Daniel worked from home on Wednesdays and said the background noise of video calls was distracting. We got married when I was 29. It was a small wedding. I had wanted something bigger, but Daniel said intimate was more meaningful, and I had convinced myself by that point that I agreed. My maid of honor was Maya. There were 11 people at the reception. By the time I was 31, 2 years into the marriage, I had a very small life. I did freelance design work, but only a few clients Daniel had approved of, meaning clients who didn't require in-person meetings or phone calls at inconvenient hours. I cooked dinner most nights. I kept the apartment clean in a specific way that Daniel had preferences about. I did not make plans without checking with him first, not because he forbade it explicitly, but because the cost of making plans he disapproved of, the sighing, the pointed silence, the comment the next morning about how he'd felt dismissed, was simply too high. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that because I know it matters to how we categorize things, and for a long time I used that fact to talk myself out of understanding what was happening. He never hit me, so it must be fine. He never screamed, so it must be fine. He pays the bills and remembers my birthday and tells me he loves me, so it must be fine. What I know now, and what I want you to hear if you're sitting somewhere recognizing pieces of this story, is that control doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it comes with spreadsheets. Sometimes it comes in a reasonable voice that makes you feel like the irrational one for being upset. Sometimes it comes in the form of a man who reads a text message from his injured wife on the kitchen floor and rolls over and goes back to sleep. I had become very good at being small. I didn't notice how small until the fracture. My wrist healed in about 6 weeks. During that time, Daniel brought it up twice, once to tell his coworker about it over the phone in a way that was almost funny, like it was a quirky household story, and once to ask if I'd made the follow-up orthopedic appointment because we were still on his insurance and he didn't want any billing issues. I made the appointment. The orthopedic doctor was a woman named Dr. Reyes. And when she looked at my chart and then looked at me, she asked how I was doing. Not the medical version of that question. The other one. I said I was fine. She said, okay. Then she said, almost quietly, that her office had a pamphlet at the front desk about a support line if I ever wanted it. She didn't say anything else. She handed me my discharge papers and said my wrist was healing well. I took the pamphlet. I put it in the bottom of my purse. I did not throw it away. I started thinking differently after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but there was a shift, small and quiet, like a window cracking open an inch. I started noticing when I flinched before speaking. I started noticing the particular shape of his moods and how I had learned to read them from across a room, the way animals learn to read weather. I started noticing how I had gotten very, very good at not needing things. I started thinking about the girl I had been at 26, the one who met her friends on Thursdays and had opinions about things and laughed loudly and called her mom on the drive home from work every single night. I had not called my mom on a drive home in 3 years because I did not drive alone anymore. I had not called my mom from home because Daniel was usually there, and calling her when he was home meant answering questions later about what we talked about for so long. I started calling her on the days he went into the office. My mom cried the second time. She said she had been waiting, she said she hadn't wanted to push. She said she loved me and that she was there, and I stood in the kitchen in my own home feeling like a person who had been underwater for years and had finally found a pocket of air. The night that changed everything happened in March, about 4 months after I broke my wrist. Daniel had a work conference 3 hours away. He was gone Thursday through Saturday. I remember standing in the apartment after his car pulled out of the parking garage, just standing there in the silence, and it was a different silence than the midnight kind. It was spacious. I opened all the windows even though it was cold. I had given myself a project while he was gone. I was going to reach out to Lexi. I had been drafting the message in my head for weeks. I knew it would be awkward. I knew she might not respond. Or might respond with the kind of cool politeness that meant the friendship was over. I had rehearsed the shame of it, but I had decided I could survive the shame if it meant the chance of getting her back. I sat down on the couch with my phone on Thursday evening and I started typing. What I intended to send: "Hey Lex, I know it's been way too long, and I owe you a real explanation. I've been going through some things and I pushed everyone away and I'm really sorry. I miss you. Would you ever want to talk?" What I actually sent, because I had 3 numbers in my contacts starting with L and I was not paying close enough attention, none of that. I had sent it to the wrong number entirely. I didn't realize immediately. I hit send, set my phone down, and went to make tea. When I came back, there was a reply. "Hi. This is actually Marcus. I think you might have the wrong number. But this message sounds like it came from a really honest place, and I hope whoever you meant to send it to gets to read it." I stared at that for a long time. I wrote back. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's mortifying." He wrote, "Don't be. Seriously. You okay?" I don't know why I answered honestly. Maybe because he was a stranger, maybe because the apartment was empty and the windows were open and I was tired of performing fineness. Maybe because he had said "you okay" and not "be fine," and those are different questions. I wrote, "Not really. But I think I'm figuring it out." He wrote, "That sounds like the start of something good, actually." His name was Marcus. He had gotten that number 3 months ago when he switched carriers and had apparently gotten someone's recycled digits. He was 34, lived about 20 minutes from me, worked as a physical therapist at a sports rehab clinic. He had a dry sense of humor that came through even in text. When I apologized again for the wrong number, he said, "Honestly, the most interesting thing that's happened to me on a Thursday in months. Don't take it away from me." We talked for 2 hours that first night. Not about anything heavy about the city, about whether the Thai place on Merchant Street was actually good or just popular, about a documentary we had both apparently watched and had completely different reactions to. It was the easiest conversation I'd had with another human being in longer than I could measure. I went to sleep that night feeling something I didn't have a word for right away. I found the word the next morning. Normal. I felt normal. I had forgotten that talking to people could feel like that: easy, warm, no cost to it, no calculation required. I texted Lexi the next day, the right number this time. She wrote back in 20 minutes. She said she had missed me. She said she'd wondered what happened. I told her a little, not everything, not yet, and she said, "I'm here. Whatever you need. When can I see you?" I drove to her apartment on Saturday while Daniel was still at his conference. We sat in her kitchen for 4 hours, and she made pasta and I cried twice, and she didn't ask me to explain myself more than I was ready to. When I left, she hugged me for a long time and said, "You seem like you're waking up." That's exactly what it felt like. I want to tell you about the next part carefully, because it's the part where I made decisions that were mine, and I'm proud of them, and I don't want to tell it wrong. When Daniel got back from his conference, I was different. Not visibly, not in a way he named right away. But I was paying attention differently. I was noticing. The first Sunday after he got back, he made a comment about the way I'd rearranged a shelf while he was gone. Not a fight, just a tone. Just the particular way he had of making me feel like I had done something incorrect in my own home. A week ago, I would have apologized and moved things back. I looked at him and said, "I like it better this way." He looked at me for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. That was it. That was the whole exchange. But I stood there and felt something settle in my chest like a stone finding the bottom of a river. I had not apologized. The shelf stayed. I started talking to a therapist in April. Her name was Dr. Oze, and she had an office with good light and a box of tissues on the table between us that I used every single session for the first 2 months. She did not tell me what to do. She asked questions. She reflected things back to me. She used the word coercive control in our 3rd session, and I went home and sat with that phrase for 3 days, turning it over. I called my mom more. I had lunch with Lexi twice in April, 3 times in May. I started taking a ceramics class on Tuesday evenings, something I had wanted to do for years. When Daniel asked about it, I said it was something I was doing for myself. He said he hoped it wouldn't interfere with dinner timing. I said I'd handle dinner. I was finding the edges of myself again. I had been so flattened for so long that finding them felt disorienting at first, like pressing on a limb that had fallen asleep. I should tell you about Marcus, because this isn't a love story in the traditional sense and I don't want to present it as one, but he was part of it. We kept texting, not constantly, but regularly. He was funny and thoughtful, and he had this quality I didn't have a name for until later. He always asked follow-up questions. Most people, when you say something in passing, let it go. Marcus caught things. He remembered what I'd said 2 weeks ago. He'd write, "Hey, how did that conversation with your sister go? Or did the ceramics class end up being what you thought?" It was such a simple thing. It was devastating in the best way. We met for coffee in May, a public place, daytime, very undramatic. He was tall and had a calm way about him, not quiet, not shy, just settled. Like a person who had decided what they thought about most things and was comfortable sitting in the space that created. I told him more than I'd planned to. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't say "you should leave him" or "I can't believe you stayed that long." He said, "It sounds like you've been doing an enormous amount of work to survive something you deserved a lot better than." I had to look away for a minute after that. I told him I wasn't ready for anything. He said he understood completely and wasn't asking for anything. He said he was glad the wrong number went through. I left Daniel in June. I want to tell you how I did it, because I've learned since that a lot of people don't leave because they don't know how, and because leaving feels impossible when someone has spent years making you feel like you can't manage without them. I did not do it alone. I had Dr. Osei. I had my sister Maya, who I had finally told everything to in May. She drove 4 hours to sit with me the weekend, I told her, and she held my hand, and she said, "I have been waiting to help you with this for 2 years. Just tell me what you need." I had my mom, I had Lexi. I had quietly, over the course of 3 months, rebuilt enough of a support system that when the time came, I had somewhere to go and people to call. I also had a lawyer. This is the thing I want to say clearly, because one of the things coercive control does is make you believe you have no rights, no leverage, no ground to stand on. It took me 2 sessions with a family attorney to understand that this was not true. I was on the lease. I was entitled to a share of the assets we had accumulated together. I had documentation, a journal I'd been keeping since February, on Dr. Osei's suggestion, and I had rights. I moved out on a Saturday while Daniel was at his parents' house for the weekend, 2 hours away. Maya and her husband came with a truck. My mom drove in the night before. Lexi brought food and packing tape, and her particular brand of determined cheerfulness that made the whole thing feel almost manageable. By the time Daniel got home that Sunday evening, I was in Maya's guest room. I had sent him a message that said I had left, that I would be in contact through my attorney, and that I would not be returning. He called 7 times that night. I did not answer. My attorney handled the communication after that. We were divorced by October. The process was exactly as unpleasant as you might expect. Daniel hired an aggressive lawyer, made things difficult at every possible turn, contested things he had no legal basis to contest. But my attorney was thorough and patient, and the documentation I had kept mattered. The settlement was fair. I received my share. I want you to know that because I think we are trained to expect that the legal process will punish women who leave, and sometimes it does, and I'm not pretending it's easy or equal. But I want you to know it is possible, and documentation matters, and you deserve to fight for what is yours. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had my own apartment small, on the 3rd floor of a building with a courtyard, 2 blocks from a really good farmer's market that I went to every Saturday morning. I had rebuilt my freelance client list back to something that paid well. I was still doing ceramics on Tuesdays. I was still seeing Dr. Osei, less frequently now, but still, I was still talking to Marcus. We took it slowly, which I needed. He was patient in a way that never felt like he was holding his breath or waiting for me to be done processing. It felt like genuine patience, like a person who understood that some things take the time they take. We dated for 6 months before I felt ready to call it that. We have been together for almost a year now, and he still asks follow-up questions and still remembers what I said 2 weeks ago and still looks at me like the person I am rather than the person I'm supposed to be for his convenience. I'm not telling you the story ends with him, though, because that's not actually the point. Last month, I had coffee with a woman from my ceramics class named Diane. She was 33, and she had a husband who reorganized the cabinets without telling her. She laughed when she said it, that particular laugh women use when they're not sure if something is funny or not, when they're waiting to see how you'll respond before they decide how to feel about it. I did not laugh back. I said, "Can I ask you something? Does he make you feel like you're too sensitive when you bring things up?" She stopped smiling. We talked for 2 hours. I gave her Dr. Osei's card at the end. She looked at it for a long time. I don't know what Diane will do. I don't know if she'll call. I don't know if she's where I was at 29, at the beginning of the slow compression, or somewhere further along the line. I only know that someone asked me once, with a pamphlet and a quiet voice, and it mattered even though I didn't act on it immediately. Sometimes, the seed needs time. I think about the jar of pasta sauce sometimes. I think about how something that small was actually the thing that cracked the surface, not because it was dramatic, but because lying on that kitchen floor waiting for footsteps that never came, I finally let myself know something I had been not knowing for 3 years. I think about sending a message to the wrong number and getting the right one back. I think about the version of me who sat in the ceramics studio 6 months later and made a bowl with her own 2 hands, the wrist that had healed stronger than before, and set it on the drying shelf and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she had made something. I used to believe the story of my life was being written by someone else. I thought my job was to be a good character in someone else's narrative, accommodating, invisible, useful, quiet. I edited myself down to fit into the space I was given, and I told myself that was love. I know now it was not love. I know now what love actually looks like because I have seen it in my sister driving 4 hours without being asked, in my mom picking up the phone every day, in a stranger who said you okay and meant it, in a doctor who slipped a pamphlet across a desk and trusted me to know what to do with it when I was ready. And I know it looks like this, too. A woman in her own apartment, with her own bowls on her own shelves, calling whoever she wants, staying as long as she likes, keeping the rug untaped because she doesn't mind the way it slides. Because it's her rug now in her own home, and she is not afraid of falling. I rescued myself first. Everything good came after.